Hello and welcome to Evolving on Purpose, a show I have created in hopes that I can inspire you to take the deep dive into discovering who you are and what you came here to do. Each week, I will have on individuals to share their unique journey to self-discovery and where their purpose is taking them. I will also do solo episodes to share what I am currently learning, practicing, or even just contemplating. So come on, what are you waiting for? Join me in Evolving on Purpose. Hello, today I have Cameron Allen on the podcast. I am so excited to introduce him. I heard him on Astrology Hub. If you want to check that out, they did a really cool, so many sessions on the house systems. And so I asked Cameron to come and talk a little bit about health and astrology, because that is just such a cool thing. I didn't even know astrology did, right? Like we hear about astrology and we hear about the horoscopes and things like that, but we don't hear about how it can really help us live healthier lives. So I'm so excited to introduce Cameron. He started in health and sports sciences and then moved into and has a psychology background, but has now moved into astrology and herbalism. And he helps people live healthier lives utilizing these tools. So I'm so excited to have you, Cameron. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Angela. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, that's one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, actually, being not only how practical and applicable astrology can be in people's lives in ways they don't even know, but like how to present that to people in a way that removes it from the context of mainstream astrology, where like we were saying before, like it's all just about your sun sign. It's like, well, what does that even mean? Because it's so overgeneralized. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk about some things today.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into it, but I would just kind of want to back up and hear a little bit about your story. Like, how did you come to the degree that you were learning in college first, and then how did you transition from that? Like, what were the things that happened along the way? How did you grow up and turn into this? I always love hearing the evolution of your story.
Yeah, totally. So to even begin things, like I didn't really want to go to college too much. But I ended up getting a scholarship for football. So I went to college, and since I didn't really want to go so much, it was like, well, what do I study if I'm going to a place I don't want to go to? And I figured, well, I have a body, so I might as well get a degree in health and sports science. And so I started with a degree in health and sports science with a minor in psychology, or like sports psychology. And as I went along, after like 2 or 3 years, I really started, like the psychology part of it really like turned me on. And so I like really got into that. And so I switched my major to psychology, and then I made my minor be sports psychology. But then I ended up getting injured in college. And so I ended up just getting a double major. And so I got the health and sports science and I got the psychology, because if I'm going to be human my whole life, why not learn about the body and why not learn about the mind? Because that's going to be the things that are consistent in my life.
Yeah, I love that approach.
Yeah, totally. And then after that, when I got out of college, I was working at like a mental health facility for youth. And I just started having some like really interesting experiences there, where I had to start questioning like what I thought life was about in a lot of different ways. So I started like going to like metaphysical stores and asking people questions, because no muggles had the answers. And so I had to go seek out answers. And as that began to unfold, I ended up getting a job at a spiritual supply store. And that's where I started learning herbalism. And I always tell people my herbalism connects to the health and sports science, and then the astrology plugged into the psychology. But as I continued on my path, both of them just infused into both things. And so I started using herbs from a psychological perspective and started using astrology from a physiological perspective. And so now both of them have synthesized perfectly with all that.
I love that so much. When you're trying to figure out what to do and you're just sitting there going like, what am I supposed to do with my life? If you just keep moving forward, it's like the pieces always fall. Even if you don't understand why you're drawn to something at that moment, when you look back, it will make sense. So I always try to tell people just move forward with what is calling you right now. That's what I love about human design is most people are generators and they're here to respond, right? And so you're like, ooh, this lights me up right now. You don't have to know why, right? Like you just follow it and you'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now let's talk about just give us a little bit more information, and you have so many cool classes that I cannot wait. I'm going to take them all. But tell us about why you use astrology and health and how we can marry these two. Like give us a little bit of information about how you can see that.
Yeah, totally. So there's like two orientations that I've been approaching from lately, especially is that I began to like separate my medical astrology practice from what I call my holistic health and astrology practice. Whereas one is like scholarly and it's like predictive and things like that, which is more like medical astrology. And then the health and sports science portion of it, well, not the health and sports science, the holistic health and astrology part of it is like very simple things that everybody can follow that are going to be applicable almost to anybody, but it will like give everyone a chance to see what's in their chart and to emphasize things in their lives so that they can like apply it immediately. So with my holistic health and astrology classes, I just got done doing a 5-week course with Synchronicity University. That was my second go round of it. On my website, I have a 5 classes on holistic health and astrology. And so it's really just about, first of all, understanding how astrology plugs into reality first, because a lot of times we come into astrology and then we don't know anything about the body. We don't know anything about the cycles of nature. We don't know anything about plants. It's not like we're walking around being medicine men all the time or medicine women. And so it's important for people to start being able to start changing their perspective on like what is reality in and of itself. And once you start to understand what reality is in some very fundamental ways, we start to plug in things into the astrology. So I'll give an example. So let's take Cancer, for instance, the sign of Cancer. When we talk about the sign of Cancer from a medical astrology perspective, we're talking about the stomach, we're talking about the mucosal membrane, and we're talking about things like that. And I say that's awesome, but what if somebody doesn't really know much about the stomach, or if somebody doesn't know about the mucosal membranes and what that really means? From a holistic health and astrology perspective, I would say, oh, you have Cancer, be mindful of the water metabolism in your body. And so when I'm talking about water metabolism, I'm not only talking about the water that you're drinking or the water that you're digesting when you're taking a shower, but I'm also talking about your emotional state and how can you enhance your ability to digest and process the emotions, which represents the water. And so I give some practical things to think about, feel into when it comes to that and being a Cancer. And so that is something that everybody can apply right now immediately. But if somebody has a Cancer sun, moon, ascendant, or a stellium in Cancer, that will be emphasized in their life. And they will be needing that more than other people, even though everybody will need it. And so it's like the most practical, applicable thing ever. And it's the thing that could be utilized because, there's a lot of mainstream astrology out there that is like sometimes like, well, what does that even mean? Or like, is this even fully helpful? So I made something, holistic health and astrology, that is absolutely applicable to everybody all the time. And if we disperse this throughout the world in a mainstream kind of way, everybody will be better for it because it's teaching the basics of health and corresponding them to zodiacal signs. And then if you look at your chart, then, things blossom forth from there. And then we get more technical later. But, we don't need to be technical. We don't need to know how to do a back handspring or the technique to do a back handspring when we don't know how to crawl, when we don't know how to walk, when we don't know how to squat properly. Yeah. And so that's the approach that I've been taking lately. So
I just keep seeing this over and over again. And January for me was like intentional, right? Like, let's get intentional. What am I focusing my attention on? And February has been balance. I just keep everybody that I've talked to in February, it just feels like we just have to bring some balance to our lives. And that's what you're saying with this. We can apply these things to bring in a little bit of balance, and that's where we can start. And once you get some balance, then if you want to dive deeper, you can keep going and be a little bit more intentional with, okay, I'm this sign and I do lean towards this, and what can I do and what can I bring in? But yeah, just understanding. And I notice a lot that people they're not really in their bodies that often, right?
Yeah, 1,000%. Oh my gosh, especially when it comes to like astrologers and also like people who get into astrology a lot. It's like because we're so in the celestial spheres that we forget about the terrestrial plane.
Yeah.
And it's like such an important thing. I'm all about being in the body, being with the body, and like understanding like everything that is spiritual and celestial reflects in the terrestrial and practical and physical and material.
Yeah. Right. Like even the everyday person, they're in the future. They're always in the future. They're always in the worry or what I've got to do or where I've got to be or what's going on. And they're not in their body. And it's like, we can either be, yeah, in a dreamlike going into these realms, or we can be, in our everyday lives, going to work, sitting there, not. My mom said the other day, she noticed her leg, her ankle was swelling. And she thought that it was probably swollen for a long time and she just never noticed. I'm like, how would you not notice? I would notice that like the second. I'd be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? She's like, I just don't really notice things that often about like pain, or I don't know. How do we get more into our body?
Yeah, so the first thing is always the breath. And so even before I keep moving forward, I always tell people like how to like it's really important to have our priorities straight. And so the importance of having our priorities straight is like the first thing, the most important thing before everything is spirit. It's the breath, right? Because
Yeah.
how long can you even exist without the breath? So we always start with the breath first. Then the next thing is water. It's like we can't last that long without water. And then the thing after that is food or like external nourishment that we bring into our body. And then after that is movement. And so if you haven't been breathing well, if you haven't been drinking enough water, if you haven't been eating nourishing food, if you haven't been moving, it's like, why are you worrying about your 401k? Why are you worrying about what your partner said to you last week? Why are you worrying about what your dad said to you when you were 2? It's like we have our priorities all mixed up.
Yeah.
And so just finding a way to like come back to that simplicity is like the easiest way to get back in your body. And also there's also like amazing things like doing like Abhyanga from the Ayurvedic tradition, which is self-massage. There's things like making sure that you can get into a squat position for over 2 minutes. Things like that, they allow you to really be in your body and drop in pretty deep there. Yeah. So that's what I would say to start.
Yeah. I've been really obsessed with the fascia right now, trying to do certain stretches to kind of stretch the fascia. And then for Christmas, I asked for just these little balls so that, yeah, I could roll on them and do a little self massage. And that is exactly it. You start with the basics and then you can add these little things. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. I mean, we brush our teeth, we take a shower. There are things that we do every single day. My coffee routine is like a ridiculous 10 or 15 minutes. Like I do that every day, right? Like, why can't we make sure that we're doing the basics, right?
Right, exactly. And then even when we get done doing the basics, oftentimes some of the other routines that we did before like become less important or we're less dependent on them. It's like it's like it doesn't matter if they're important or not. It's really just about, are we dependent on something that actually might not be in our highest good, to keep us going, like energy drinks. And I would say even sometimes coffee, depending on how much coffee somebody's drinking or what it does to their body. So yeah, it's a super important thing to, not even a super important thing to just go out and do immediately. It's something to feel into. It's something to think about so that you can figure it out in a way that's sustainable and fits into your life.
Yeah.
Because without that, me saying something that sounds cool or a good idea doesn't mean jack squat if you do it for 1 week because you heard it on the podcast today, and then in 3 weeks you're not doing it anymore, right? So you have to be mindful of that too as well.
Yeah. Can you give us just like a real quick in each of those categories? Because I know that some people listening to this have not really paid attention to that. So maybe do we focus on our breath once a day? Do we set a timer? What's something that we could implement for maybe each category? The breath, water, does it matter if it's filtered water? Does it matter if it came out of a water bottle? Like what are some, just a couple of things from each category that we could focus on?
Yeah, so even right now in this moment, wherever anyone is at, whether they're listening to this on audio, on video, or video, I would invite them to make sure that they put their feet on the ground right now. And if their feet aren't on the ground and they're sitting down, make sure you feel rooted in your sit bones or get cozy in your sit bones. And then just start to flutter your eyes a little bit. And then close your eyes. And then just observe the breath without judgment, just observing the breath. There is no wrong here. There is no right here. It's just observation. And I want you to observe the quality of your breath. Does it feel smooth? Does it feel erratic? And just knowing the way in which you're breathing is informing the intelligence of your body. And observe where the breath is in your body. Is it in your stomach? Is it in your chest? Is it in the rib region? Just observing. Observing if it's all in your front body or if your back ribs are also getting some love with the breath. Just observing. And then taking your right hand and pressing your thumb onto your right nostril to close it off. And then I'm going to set a 45-second timer just to breathe slow, long, deep inhales and exhales out of the left nostril. Release the right hand. And in your mind's eye, while also still focusing on the breath, just observe your feet in your mind's eye, staying focused on the breath. Now take a look at the heels. And looking at the ankles. Observing the shins and the calves. Observing the knees. Observing the quads. Observing the hamstrings. Observing the groin area, the hips, the genitals, the pelvic floor. Taking a slow, long, deep breath into the pelvic floor. Noticing if there's any tension there. Just allowing yourself to release, to discontinue the gripping. Now bringing the breath to the navel and the low back, being sure to expand the breath in a 360-degree motion angle. Now to the rib cage area. Now to the chest and the thoracic spine, being sure to expand in all directions. Breathing into the shoulders, biceps, triceps, continuously observing the forearms, the wrist, the hands, the fingers, the neck region, the point where your spine meets your head, the chin, the ears, the cheeks, the chin, the nose, the bones below your eyes themselves. Breathe as if you're breathing into your eyes. The temples, the forehead, the skull, the crown. And then coming back to your heart and taking 3 calm, soothing breaths, maybe with some audible exhales. And then slowly, calmly, in a controlled manner, begin to flutter the eyes open again. And once you enter back into the room, look around you, see what you see. Take note of what you smell. Take note of any sounds around you, near and far, and how they blend together. Observe if you can taste anything. Maybe put your hands on your legs or on a desk or wherever you are, just to feel.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I feel very grounded, and usually I think of breath like, oh, I need to do my breath work today. I need to utilize breath to get into kind of a theta state so that I can tap into help, for how to guide my day and things like that. But that was like non-judgment, just sitting there. I don't know. Usually it's like, how do I fix my breath? How do I fix me? Yeah, I've got all my signs and fire signs and air signs and
Yeah, totally.
just like, what do I do? And that was just very like, what is, right? Like, let's just observe what is.
Yeah. A lot of times, especially when it comes to like the breath or the way we're like inhaling and exhaling life, even as a metaphorical perspective. It's like we spend more energy trying to clinch or fix or direct things than we do even just existing and allowing things to flow. And so that's always something really important to be mindful of when it comes to the breath, you know?
That was a very real life way to look at. I'm studying a lot about, loving your inner child and loving the things that come up in you. That was like a real moment of how to do that. Like my breath was very shallow, but you weren't like, make sure you're taking these deep breaths. It was like, once I saw it and just was like there with it, it did deepen, right? Like
Exactly.
it did kind of come to, but I had to see where am I? What's going on?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's like it could take like 3 therapy sessions for people to like understand like all your inner child wants us to be seen, but we could literally do this breathing practice and begin to not only see what's in us as emotions that come up, but also it's like your thoracic spine hasn't been seen in 4 weeks by your breath. And so what is that doing to your life as well,
Yeah.
It's like even in your mom's case, like her breath hasn't seen her ankle in months. And so like what does that actually do to a person? It does things and people don't acknowledge them. And then in our culture specifically, as we age, people talk about getting older and they talk about it from a very dull place. That's actually a pretty dismal way to grow up and exist in the world when there's so many other alternatives that we can have through education and knowledge and non-judgment and understanding of what life really is. And then from the breath, we would go to water. And so like right after that, even just thinking about it myself, like I got some hot water right here. And so after the breath, it's water and water metabolism. So after that, like maybe I would ask somebody like, how do you feel? And if I ask them how they feel, what I'm asking them is, how are you metabolizing your emotions? And if I was in a session with them in person, I might hand them a cup of hot water and just have them begin to sip the hot water and tell me how they feel to help the emotions move, right? Because emotions are energy in motion. Ideally, they're in motion. Oftentimes, they're pretty stuck. And so if these are things that are people's priorities in life, it's like how much different would someone's life be if at the end of the day, the worst case scenario is that I sit down, do a breathing practice, tune into my senses, and sip hot water every single day. It's like you would be able to acknowledge how much you've been activated throughout the day and like you're not being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, And so coming back to that practice just puts things in proper perspective. I started doing this practice for so long at a point in time to where in my morning or when it was close to the end of the day, if I was talking to somebody or if I was in a situation that I disliked, I literally would just start thinking about drinking hot water and just breathing. And I would just be like, you know what? I kind of got to go. I got to go because I need to go breathe and I need to go drink hot water and metabolize my day and be with spirit, And so making that foundational in our life, it's a beautiful thing,
Yeah.
It also, the hot water helps with digestion really greatly too as well. So it's just like,
I love that. I mean, that's simple. Somebody that could say, oh, I don't like tea. I don't like this. I don't like that. I mean, hot water it's accessible to everyone, right?
Totally, yeah. And I like you were saying something about like what kind of water, I recommend spring water to be honest. Yeah, but if you can get like reverse osmosis water or some other bougie water, then like more power to you. Like alkaline water can be really helpful, especially if somebody is like in a very acidic state already. Yeah, there's so many ideas around water out there. I would just say try to get spring water. If you know where spring water is in your local environment, I would say go there. Make sure that there's no pollution in your environment first as well, or how much pollution is in your environment. But then like getting spring water from the store, There are like really great machines that filter things out, make sure there's a carbon filter. Yeah, that's what I would say start.
Yeah, I love reverse osmosis water. I have a machine, but then I add back in minerals.
Minerals,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Good call. Yeah. They also have like these like cool machines where you put your water in it and then it like spins it.
I've seen that. I'm very interested
So
in
that
that.
so that your water isn't still and stagnant.
Yeah.
And it brings the prana, the life force energy back into it. So it's a lot of different things you do. Also, when you boil water, that's going to get the energy moving too as well. So, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the water component of it. And then the nutrition component, we could talk about this all day, to be honest. What I would say is make sure that you're eating food that's food. I would just start there, honestly. Be mindful of how much you're drinking smoothies that are cold. Be mindful of how you're cooking your food, how you're preparing your food, how the food that you're eating was prepared. Because oftentimes we get into these debates about what is good for me and what is bad for me, and people get confused because they actually think the problem is the food itself. Let's take, for instance, I'll talk about two different types of milks. Okay, so let's talk about cow milk. Oftentimes people think there's an issue with cow milk. And first of all, in Ayurveda, the way we process cow's milk is you boil it. And also, we don't use A1 milk, we use A2 milk. And we use milk from a cow that's giving its milk away freely. Because there are cows who do that when they're taken care of properly, they give their milk away freely. And they're not in some like traumatic state when they're giving the milk, which gives us that energy. And so there's nothing wrong with milk inherently. There's something wrong with the process of how the milk got delivered to you, between the milk coming out of the teat or even for them because, the way they're treated all the way to you. That's the actual problem. And then let's talk about oat milk. A lot of times oats are like one of the most pesticide infested plant crops in the United States, from my understanding. And so then people start being like, oh no, don't have oat milk. There's nothing wrong with oat milk. There's something wrong with having pesticides in food and you ingesting that. And so if you want oat milk, find an oat milk that is glyphosate free, right? Instead of thinking, oh, oat milk is a problem. Oh, dairy is a problem. It's like not necessarily so, because everything, for the most part, can be processed a certain way that it can be digested. So go educate yourself on those things is what I would really say about nutrition. And also try not to eat too late at night, because if you eat late at night, then you're not going to be healing. Your body's not going to be healing at night. You're going to be digesting food. You're not going to be healing. You're not going to be recovering from what happened in the day. You're not going to be processing your emotions and your psychological states. And it creates heaviness and it creates grogginess. And then you wake up and you feel not nourished, and then you're grumpy, which makes you feel not nourished in a different kind of way than food. But also when it comes to nourishment, being mindful of how much blue light you're taking in, being mindful of how many curse words your partner's saying, being mindful of how negative people are around you, being mindful of watching a scary movie before you fall asleep at night, being mindful of how much sun that you're getting. All these things have to do with nourishment. When was the last time you had a hug over 5 seconds? And do you even know how that plays into the nourishment or lack of nourishment that you're receiving in your life? And so just being mindful of all these things. I would even add mood into nourishment, to be honest. But in general, I don't, just to separate it and keep it as its own thing. But I even did this thing for I think I had like an 8-month period where I just used the elements. I used the elements as nourishment. And so the earth element was the mineral content in the food I was eating. The water element was the water I was ingesting in my emotions. The air element was the breath, And then the fire element was the sunlight that I was taking in. And it also was like the exercise. But really, I was putting exercise and movement into every single category. So the earth element nourishment from a movement perspective is how long have I squatted that day? Or lifting weights, heavy weights. The water element from a movement and exercise perspective is to be able to flow. Did I move my spine in an undulating fashion for the day? Did I dance today? Did I listen to a song and then let my body do as it will and just flow with it? Let the energy move, energy and motion, emotion. For the air element, what did I do for the air element? Oh, I was doing pranayama. So it was like the movement of the breath, controlling the movement of the breath. And then for the fire element, I was just doing something as intense as I could to get myself sweating. Anyway, I'll stop there. That's what I'll say.
I think it's just a really good way to be intentional to make sure that you are getting that balance, right? You are seeing and utilizing each of the elements, because we have, just like we look at the whole chart, we have the whole chart in us. We have all of the elements in us. And I think there is a lot of people that like to put a lot of emphasis on just one, right? Oh, you are just one, but we're all of them, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's universal, it's like if we start with these universal things, even the things that we find in medical astrology that are potential problems, all of them become acute. I'm not going to say that. I can't say all of them. A lot of them will become just acute issues instead of having the chance of becoming chronic issues.
Yeah. And so would you use medical astrology more with somebody that was having like an acute medical issue? And otherwise, if you're generally healthy, but you're very out of balance, you would use this more holistic approach?
Both and either or is what I would say, because if somebody comes to me healthy, then they still desire something. And if they desire something, then I can invite them into doing preventative things. And if somebody comes to me and they have chronic issues, they're going to need the foundational basics anyway.
Yeah.
And so if nothing else, it's like allowing people to have their awareness put onto these things and then observe in their own life. How much have I been doing this? How have I not been doing this? How is this applicable in my life? How is it not applicable in my life? And if somebody does that for 3 weeks to 3 months, things could change so much. And that's just the beginning.
I can't wait. I'm going to utilize the breath the way that you showed us and the hot water. I always think, because I don't have any water in my chart, but obviously I do, right? We have the whole thing, but I have all fire and air, that emotions are all in my head, but really I'm just not seeing them in the body. Like I'm not connecting to that, right? I'm just kind of forgetting about that part, or I'm not being intentional with it. So I'm really excited to utilize the hot water with that.
Yeah, and it's like if you have a void, elemental void is what I call it, or what it's called in general. If you have an elemental void, then it's like, do you understand the nature of water, and like what is your relationship to water externally? Because if I don't have water, how do I bring water in so that I can have it in a balance that's proper for my body and for my state of being?
Yeah. So that's probably why it is so healthy to me, for me, having no water or earth in my planets, to really get grounded and to bring in the water element.
Super important. Super important. Yeah. Like even just like being in forest like areas, being by bodies of water, taking baths, maybe even doing like a clay mask just all over your body, and just like bringing in those elemental forces can be like a huge difference.
Yeah. No, this has been so informative, like one of the most health informative conversations I've ever had. So I'm really excited about this. Can we just talk about the sixth house a little bit? Anybody can go listen to Astrology Hub, your sixth house talk, and learn more about the sixth house. But can we just talk a little bit about the sixth house and what it would look like if you pulled up your chart and you saw what what sign you have in your sixth house, what that could look like for you.
Yeah, totally. And so something to think about with the sixth house too, because it is said to be a house that oftentimes can bring in unfortunate events. It's because sometimes we're blind to the things that we're doing in our day-to-day lives to create illness. And so whenever it comes to the sixth house, the first thing that I always think about for myself is, how am I needing to make a necessary adjustment today? And so for me, I have Taurus in the sixth house. And so how am I going to make my necessary adjustments in the slowest, calmest, most basic, simple ways? And then I'm going to make it luxurious. Taurus. And so if somebody has Gemini there, then maybe they'll do it by gathering a variety of information and utilizing a variety of tools, but being sure not to scatter out too far, but to allow themselves to be adaptable in their day-to-day life. And then even taking a step back and going back to Taurus, Taurus rules the thyroid. And so for me, it's about how am I metabolizing things in a way that is allowing me to stay heated up, because the thyroid sets the metabolic rate. And so making sure that I have enough heat in my body to metabolize things. And for Gemini in the sixth house, we would check in with the lungs, yes, but also the peripheral nervous system and the nervous system in general. And so just being mindful of those things. And then also being mindful, the planet that rules that sign is oftentimes the thing that actually determines, is there a problem here or not? And so the generalization of the sixth house being an unfortunate place isn't enough. We have to look to the planet that rules that and see where it's at. Is it in the first house? If it's in the first house, there might be a little bit of problem. Is it in the 12th house? It might be a little bit of problem there. If it's in the 8th house, it might be a little bit of problem there. But in the other houses, it might not necessarily mean anything. Like, let's say, it'll mean something. That's not true. It doesn't mean anything as far as like negative significance. So let's say that the ruler of the sixth house, so let's take Gemini in the sixth house. If Mercury's in your 10th house, it might mean that you work with your career. 10th house might be working with people who are ill, sixth house. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get sick in that way. It might mean that your work has to do with that. Or let's say the ruler of the sixth house is in the 7th house. That might mean that your partner becomes ill, or you might have a partner who has illness that tends to happen in their life, whether that's a lover or a business partner and things like that. Also, the sixth house can represent where like we feel overworked and underpaid. And so just like being mindful that the sixth house is right below the 7th house. And that's sometimes what we do in the sixth house. We put ourselves below others. And putting ourselves below others is not subjectively positive or negative. It's negative when we put ourselves below other people and we feel like we're becoming a slave. It's a beautiful thing to put yourself below other people when we're being in service to their higher good. And so, I'll stop there for now.
Yeah. Can I ask you, so I have Capricorn in the sixth house, which is Saturn, and my Saturn is in the 4th house. So what would that represent, do you think?
Yeah, so Capricorn in the 6th house, with the ruling planet being in the 4th house, the first question would be, what is happening with your day-to-day life that has to do with, let's keep it medical. Okay, so with the medical part of that, I would say the potential here is, what illnesses have been created through things that come from where your roots come from. So in your ancestry, what were the issues that were happening as far as health goes? And the question would be, was there a sense of dryness in the home with the family? And if there was a sense of dryness, this might influence your musculoskeletal system, your bones, your knees. It might also influence your parathyroid, which has a tendency to like create issues with like depressive episodes. And then Capricorn already has this depressive energy at times. And so that would be the question that I would ask the person to begin with, instead of assume that that is actually happening.
Yeah, I definitely deal with a lot of anxiety would be like the most, I think the root of most of it, stomach and anxiety.
Yeah, and I mean, having Capricorn in the sixth house, there's a potential where the parental figures maybe were like perfectionists, or they had a specific way they thought things should be. And so they just said should a lot. And so if someone receives a lot of shoulds, then they start to feel judged. And when we feel judged, we feel restricted and anxious. And when we feel restricted and anxious, we feel dry inside, and we don't allow ourselves to fully be nourished all the time. And that affects our bones, musculoskeletal system, things like that.
Yeah. And I can see just from having this knowledge, you have somewhere to start, right? I can look back and look at childhood and look at, how my parents were and work through some of that to help my health, right? Like it gives you something. That's what I love so much about this is let's find something that we can. I mean, I'm a generator in human design. I like to respond. I don't want to just create something out of nothing. I want something to respond to. And astrology and looking at the different houses and the different way that it can help gives me something to respond to, something to, okay, ooh, this is a starting place. This is something I can be intentional about.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And what sign is Saturn in your chart?
Libra.
Libra. Okay. So Saturn is strong there in Libra. So that's also something to consider. That you probably through time will actually become more and more healthy through the adjustments that you're making in your life, rather than the opposite, as a generalization.
Yeah.
But let's say Saturn was in Aries, that might be something that's more problematic there. So that's just another consideration for people there out there listening.
Yeah. And it's not ever like, oh, you're just doomed, right? It's giving you something to be proactive about, That's what medicine, we right now we have a sick care system. We wait till you're sick and then we treat the sickness.
Totally.
But the way that you're utilizing it, it can be preventative, or it can be very specific in how we overcome these things in a more
Yeah,
holistic
absolutely.
way.
And I would say anybody who's working with the sixth house or medical astrology, if you haven't done more than 2 timing techniques on your chart specific to this year, then I would never invite you to project doom at all. There's so many things that you would have to consider before you actually could say that there's some type of doom going on here. And so just know, like, yeah, there's just levels and layers, and most of the time we're not even looking at the amount of depth that it really takes to see when something good or bad is going to like manifest.
Yeah.
So be mindful of that too. It's like on one level, it's just about having some type of awareness and being preventative. And then on another layer, it's like, if you really, really want to know, you would have to go like really deep into the process to understand.
Yeah.
And by the time you even get to that process, you won't be projecting doom and gloom anyway, because you'll just be trying to figure it out.
That's what everything keeps pointing to me, that it's like all we need the correct mindset, right? Like everything that I look in my chart before, even my human design, I was like, oh my gosh, why'd I come for that? I've got this emotional wave that throws me off, and now I'm like, whoa, this is what helps me grow. Like I have all of these things set up that are growth, and it might have felt hard, but if I come into it with the mindset of seeing that growth, seeing that, I mean, we don't want to just fly through life without anything to work on, anything to do. So having a growth mindset when we look at this is so important. And then what do you believe, right? What do you believe this universe is here for? What do you believe that you can't, like, what is your belief about it? And then it's just timing, right? Like, we have these different things in astrology that shows us that timing is everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah,
And
well said.
so, yeah, so I just love, and I don't know if I'll ever get into predictive astrology as much as, like, how do I utilize what I have, what I came here for, and how do I maybe flow with it? But maybe someday I'll tap into some of the predictive astrology, but it's still, you don't even want to know that if you don't have the right mindset, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, from that perspective too, it's like I'm super thankful that I started my practice with like evolutionary astrology, because it rooted me in like facing things from the perspective of understanding what deeper emotional and psychological attachments that I have, what things are going on in my life in which they are disempowering versus what is empowering to me. And once you dive into things from a more soul level perspective, then you start doing things that, like, I mean, maybe predictive astrology or um, magic or anything like that. It's like you start doing it from a different space.
Yeah.
And it's like less space for it to be egocentric. And that's not to say that the ego is not involved at all, because it always is. If you have a name, if you are yourself, you have an ego. And so it's going to be a part of what's happening,
Yeah.
but it won't be egocentric.
I think it's something to look at too. I think I just saw a Rumi quote today when I got on my insight timer that was talking about how we have to be very mindful of not letting everything go, but not holding it. Like, how much are we holding on to and how much are we letting go? Because I can be very right? Like, I can be very all or nothing. I can be like, I am so in this experience, or like, whatever, nothing matters, right? Like, how do we find that really nice tension?
Yeah, I would say for people who, and I'm going to say act like nothing matters, everything not mattering matters. And so they're still playing the same game. And they're not acknowledging that they're playing the game, and they're not acknowledging how it's influencing everything and everyone around them, including themselves. And so I would just say that in general, it's just like we're always going to be in dynamic tension and a flow state of how much we should, like, what is ideal to care about, what's not ideal to care about. And so I would just, again, like the breath, observe it, watch it, and then build a relationship with it from there, rather than should or shouldn't or supposed to. It's like, where are you now? Where do you think you should be? What's your next step? Where could you get more education from? Why do you think you're where you're at right now? These are infinitely better questions or approaches than any type of judgment or any type of lack of compassion that one could bring to themselves. Just this approach that I've talked about today, honestly, the way in which people have body shame, the way in which the fitness industry projects bullshit, all these things could begin to like be processed just by this approach. And then we would have to go into like things like the things that I see out in the world now, where people oftentimes will have vices or behaviors that are actually destructive to their body, and they'll act as if they're proud of them or that they're not ashamed of them. I wouldn't say ashamed of them. I hate shame. Shame is like very unuseful and unhelpful. So I'm going to take away the word ashamed here. They're doing things that's like, oh, it doesn't matter if I'm overweight and I'm still eating ice cream. Well, it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter because you're a human and you're valuable inherently. But if you're not thinking from that perspective and you're trying to combat a system that's full of bullshit, then you're going to say, I'm going to eat this ice cream. And then in 2 days, your stomach's going to hurt. And then when you get older, you're going to be immobile. and obviously those are kind of extreme, or those are things that I don't wish upon anyone. But this is about how we're thinking about things. And I'm saying all this is an invitation to be mindful.
Yeah. And you've given us a tool, because I mean, I'm guilty of it. I love health and wellness. And at the end of the night, I'm tired and I grab something that I shouldn't be eating, and then I don't sleep well. And then my next day is off, and I know it, right? But you've just given me a tool. Like, instead of just being like, you can't have that, don't do that, I'm going to grab the hot water and maybe my journal and sit there with my breath and see why I was going to reach for that. Right? Like,
Exactly.
you gave me a tool.
1,000,000%, because the thing is, like, I give people those tools and then some other practices to do with that. And I have them sit with the thing that they're going to eat. And then when they're done doing all the things to like nourish themselves, some people have still eaten the thing, but they haven't eaten the whole thing. Or when they did eat it, they didn't feel guilt or shame about it. And so it digested differently.
Yeah.
And so it's really about how you think, not what you think.
Yeah.
It's about trying to understand reality instead of making choices from reflex responses or reflex reactions, really, in ignorance. Because a lot of things that we're taught are ignorant, and we try to combat them, or we try to do something else, or we don't do anything about it, and we think all that stuff's okay, and maybe it is for some people. But I see a lot of people out there who suffer, and to me, that's not okay if I'm not doing my part to alleviate that or be of service to it.
Yeah. No, I'm so grateful for this talk and for you to come into my life. I can't wait for all of your teachings. I'm going to dive right into those. But I just can't get over thinking about you being this college student that was like, well, I'm in a body and I have a mind, so I better learn about it. Like, that is just such a cool way that you came about that. Like, I love that. And you can just see so clearly that even though you didn't have the tools and you didn't know where you were going with this, you still stepped into that purpose and just kept writing it. And now you're here to really help us. We all have a mind, we all have a body. Like, this is it. Let's take care of it. And then we can go be of service, or we can go be a person. You don't have to love health and wellness and all the things that you love and I love to do this, but it's going to help you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Cameron. Can you just tell us a little bit, where's the best place to find you, maybe on social media or your website, or for people that want more?
Yeah. So you can find me on my website at www.cadreamplanet.com. You can find me on Instagram at cadream6. I'm sure I'm on Facebook at Cameron Allen or something like that. You can find like a lot of my work online if you just type in Cameron Allen Astrology or Cameron Allen Herbalism or Cameron Allen Yoga Journal. Also, if someone is listening today, I have a feeling there's at least one person right now since I'm saying this, feel free to reach out to me at my email address at cadreamplanet@gmail.com. If you're looking for like a longer term like mentorship, or if you're looking for like a longer term practice or like 6-month plan in order to get yourself in a different direction, not even as far as a 6-month plan that's going to have you already done in the different direction, but it'll be a 6-month plan that allows you to understand what's going on with you, what's going on with your body, what's going on with your astrology, and how to move forward from there in a non-judgmental way, in a way that is like a depth of understanding of who you are, what you are, and how you need to go about things, so that we can destroy the need to have external validation, because we know our own inherent value.
Thank you so much for that, Cameron. Thank you for coming on the
Absolutely.
show. Thank you for sharing. I mean, you shared so much that people can do right now without, doesn't cost anything, doesn't, like, they can implement it right now. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate you too.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Cameron again for sharing all of that wisdom. I love all of the really wonderful things that he shared that we can implement right now to bring in all of the elements and really get balanced. I loved that breathing exercise he took us through. I just felt so much more calm and centered as soon as I did it. I love being able to utilize these tools to really bring balance into the situation. And when we move into the world from a sense of balance, maybe starting our day that way and ending our day that way, it just changes everything. So thank you so much to Cameron. If you want to connect with him, he is a really amazing astrologer. You can go to his website. You can go to Astrologer Connect. I'll put his link to schedule him there also. So get a reading from Cameron. And if you haven't had your human design reading yet, go to evolvingonpurpose.org and schedule with me. You can do just a personal, you can do your partner and you or family, but it's just a really amazing tool to understand how your energy works and how to best move into alignment towards whatever you're working on. It really gives you the how-to and not just the characteristics of who you are, but how do you move into the best way to make decisions, the best way to get into alignment. So head on over to there and book your reading. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And as always, let's keep evolving on purpose.